Today I'm going to tell you about a disaster we think is modern. The first great paper money collapse that stopped an economy's heartbeat, sent prices soaring, and wiped a dynasty from history. Today I'll start with a question that sounds simple, but isn't. Why is paper money valuable? Because of the colorful ink printed on it, because the state declares it legal tender, or because all of us at the same time choose to believe in it? And a more disturbing question, the trillions in paper and digital money printed by central banks today, is this an untested brand new experiment? Or is it the continuation of a first trial run that happened 700 years ago in China and ended in disaster? In this video, I'll take you to 14th century China, to the first great rise of paper money, and to what may have been history's first great fiat collapse. And by the end of the video, you'll feel the weight of this sentence. We think we invented modern finance. China tried it centuries ago, and it blew up in their hands. China has always been a few steps ahead in the history of money. While Europe was still hauling heavy metal coins around, during the Song dynasty, 11th to 12th centuries, Chinese merchants realized something. Copper coins were heavy. They were unsafe to transport over long distances. They were impractical for managing large volumes of trade. The solution? First, receipts issued by private banks, then state-backed paper money. Merchants would deposit their coins somewhere safe and receive a paper claim in return over time. That claim turned into a transferable means of payment. The state saw how practical this was and took control. Official paper notes were printed in specific regions. At first, they were backed by copper or silver reserves. Their duration, conditions of use, and printing volume were limited. Paper money was, at the beginning, a genuine innovation. It sped up trade, made tax collection easier, and connected regional economies to each other. But like every financial innovation, hidden inside its success was a poisonous seed. If printing paper is this easy, why not print a bit more? In the 13th century, the Mongols took the stage. When Kublai Khan conquered China and founded the Yuan dynasty, he found himself ruling a vast but fragmented empire. Different regions with different currencies. Silver in some places, copper in others, grain payments elsewhere. Tax collection, paying troops, and managing trade were all getting harder. Kublai Khan took the Song paper money experiment a step further. He issued paper notes, called Chao, valid, across the entire empire. Decrees were published making paper money compulsory. Taxes, salaries, and commercial payments were to be made in these notes. In theory, these notes were backed by silver and copper reserves. But who could actually see those reserves in daily life? For a while, things went well. The state could finance the army without moving heavy metal. Payments between distant provinces became easier. Internal trade within the empire accelerated. But soon, the Mongol regime found itself facing never-ending wars, lavish court expenses, and a massive bureaucratic machine, and that dangerous sentence reappeared. If there's no silver in the treasury, let's just print more paper. By the 14th century, the picture was clear. The Yuan state was running constant budget deficits. Wars were expensive. The tax system was clogged. Instead of cutting spending, the court chose to print money. The empire issued new series of notes and pushed more paper into circulation. Old issues were exchanged for new ones, but this was just makeup, hiding a deeper loss of value. What happened as a result? Prices began to climb. Soldiers and officials on fixed salaries grew poorer. Peasants saw the paper in their hands lose value year after year. Merchants turned away from paper and back to silver and grain. The most critical breaking point was this. Everyone was still using paper, but no one wanted to hold it. People spent their wages as soon as they received them, converting them into real goods, or better yet, into silver, whenever possible. This behavior created a psychological multiplier that sped up inflation. To repair collapsing trust, the empire tried. Issuing new banknotes, swapping old notes for more valuable new series, forcing the use of paper money through threats and punishment. But one fact never changed. There were no reserves, no discipline, no trust. Behind paper money now stood only the weakening promise of the state, and when that promise began to collapse, paper became just paper. As the Yuan dynasty fell under the weight of political revolts and economic collapse, the Ming dynasty took the stage. The new founding emperor, Hongwu, had a problem. He wanted to distance himself from the Mongol legacy, but he also didn't want to surrender completely to silver. His solution was to design a new state note, Da Ming Bao Chao. But this was not a system that had truly learned from the past. On the contrary, it repeated similar mistakes in new packaging. From the start, the notes were declared valuable without metal backing by state decree alone. The state tried to make them compulsory in payments. Budget deficits were again covered by printing more money. The result? In the first years with limited use, it seemed to work. But as tax and salary payments grew, printing discipline broke down. Inflation surged again and the purchasing power of the notes eroded. According to historians, within a few decades, these notes became so worthless that huge denomination notes were useless even for daily transactions. Taxes were effectively collected in silver. In the market, the real currency was not paper, but metal. By the end of the 14th century and the beginning of the 15th, China had effectively abandoned paper money and shifted to a silver-based system. In other words, the fiat money experiment collapsed in its first major round due to a lack of trust and discipline. We can summarize the story so far like this. Money was born first as a receipt tied to metal reserves. Then the state said, well, we don't need metal, and turned it into a truly fiat instrument. As the state ran deficits and war and court expenses grew, it leaned on the printing press and issued more paper. Inflation and erosion of trust eventually made the paper useless. Today, many of the concepts we discuss in finance are the long shadows of those events. Expanding central bank balance sheets, injecting liquidity into markets during crises, financing government debt by creating money, keeping interest rates artificially low and money abundant. The difference? Back then, money moved around as physical sheets and rolls of paper. Today, money lives mostly as digital numbers on screens. But the core question is the same. If we are creating money faster than we create goods and services, at what point does that money become nothing but numbers? Even if open visible inflation doesn't explode, if asset prices, land, housing, stocks, rise much faster than incomes, then real purchasing power is eroding. For peasants in the Yuan and Ming eras, this meant bread and rice becoming more expensive. For a young worker today, it means rent and housing becoming unreachable. Different centuries, same question. How real is money, really? We can draw at least 3 clear lessons from this story. 1. Money is trust first and only then paper/digital code. In the Yuan and Ming periods, as the state lost metal backing, printing discipline, and transparency, the value of paper money collapsed. Today, too, when central banks turn temporary programs into permanent tools, when rules are constantly changing, when accountability mechanisms are weakened, money may still function in transactions, but trust slowly begins to fade. 2. Printing money creates short-term victory, long-term risk. For the Yuan court, printing banknotes was a life-saving solution in the moment. Soldiers were paid, war expenses were covered, but in the long term, inflation impoverished the people. The merchant class fled or pulled back. State authority was weakened. Political collapse accelerated. Today, money printing can look like an easy fix during crises. But the real question is, does it truly solve the underlying problems, or just push the bill into the future? 3. Fiat money can only survive with strong institutions. In 14th century China, there was no independent central bank, no permanent inflation targeting regime, no clear transparent balance sheet framework. The same hand that issued the money also ran politics, war, and the court, so monetary policy remained in the shadow of short-term political goals. Even in the modern world, when institutions are weak, fiat money faces the same risk again. The number printed on the paper remains, but the trust behind that number evaporates. Looking at the story of 14th century China, it's hard not to ask, are today's central banks and governments approaching the limits of their own paper money experiments? The Yuan court thought paper money was an endless resource. The Ming rulers saw it as a power tool that could rival silver. But both slammed into the same wall. When trust ends, fiat money ends. If the trillions we see on screens today aren't backed by real production and strong institutions, maybe we are just watching a more sophisticated sequel to that first fiat disaster. The answer isn't certain, but history keeps whispering one sentence. Every empire that takes money lightly suffers its greatest defeat through that very money. If what I've shared today helped you see the world from a different perspective, don't forget to subscribe, because history always has an answer. You just need to look from the right angle, and I'm here to help you find those answers buried in the dusty pages of financial history.